Hi guys, so I came across an article the other day that said they are making a sequel to The Mutilator, so I thought I'd watch the first one and do a review of it. I think this might be the most famous of the early 80s slasher films that I'd not previously seen. I mean, there are still lots of what you might call second and third tier slashers that I've not seen, the really low budget ones, things with names like Slasher Hospital, but when it comes to the well-known slasher gems of the late 70s, early 80s, I've pretty much seen the lot. Things like My Bloody Valentine, Slumber Party Massacre, The Burning. But I'd never properly watched The Mutilator before, and I would put this film in that company. I think I tried to watch it half drunk once, but I definitely didn't see every frame of the movie that night. And watching The Mutilator properly this past week, there was loads of content in this film that I didn't recognise. So I'm going to call this my first watch of the movie. This came out in 1984, which was pretty much at the back end of what I hear sometimes referred to as the golden generation of slashers, so sort of 78 to 84. So the subgenre was sort of just winding down a little bit at this point. This came out in the same year as Friday the 13th, the final chapter, and Michael Myers was pretty much done at this point. The fact that, slasher films did ultimately last the test of time, it is neither here nor there, but in 84 certainly it may have felt like the production of them was winding down. But watching this film, half of it feels like the most generic by-the-numbers slasher film you've ever seen in your life, as if at this point in time nobody had even thought to tamper with the formula at all. And yet there's another side of this movie which it's just full of little kooky, funky little things that are totally out of odds with the main slasher business at hand, almost as if the director of this was a little bit bored of the slasher genre himself by 1984, even though this was his first stab at it. So the guy who directed this, his name's Buddy Cooper, and before I go on, let me quickly say that I've always had this weird assumption that everybody called Buddy is just going to be really jovial and friendly. I'm sure there's at least one miserable dick out there who just happens to have the name Buddy, but that's just the impression I've always had in my head. This guy, he only really directed like one film, this, for like most of his life, and then just recently he's come back into the fold with a Silent Night, Bloody Night sequel. I don't know if that's in the same series as Silent Night, Deadly Night. And he's also done The Mutilator too. So yeah, he's the guy responsible for bringing this back, like 40 years after his first one. But it's not easy to find information about The Mutilator 2 online, so I still don't know if it's just a well-made fan film or whether it's a proper movie. But it's all very reminiscent of when George Miller came back and did Mad Max Fury Road, like decades after he did the original trilogy. The plot for this is so simple, it makes Halloween look like Magnolia. So we've got 6 youngsters who travel to this beach house by the sea. I guess one of their parents owns it, but they accidentally disturb the slumber of a killer who's living in the garage or underneath the house, and he starts picking them off one by one, and that is essentially the plot. When it comes to these youngsters, they are very well synchronized in this. There's like a perfect symmetry running through them. They are 3 couples. They're all white. They all feel like very well-established relationships. There's definitely a problem of individuality running through this film. There's one guy who's got like a Texan accent, or at least an accent from the southern part of the USA. I can't nail an accent down to one individual state, but this guy's voice sounds markedly different from the rest of the American actors and actresses. But that is this film's idea of diversity. 2 of the girls, I was still getting mixed up with each other right up until the finale. I think that's less to do with their faces and more to do with their dress sense and the fact that as characters, there's just nothing to make them stand out from each other. But it's just weird how half of this film is devoted to character work. Like nothing happens in the slasher department for half of this, and yet I never really felt like I had a good handle on who these people are for the most part, and I can only put that down to a slightly weak script. The 3 guys are all from exactly the same school of we're going to have a good time, we're going to chug a beer, and we're going to sleep with our girls, you know. And the three women are all from the same mould of, you keep going, you're not going to get any tonight. Although you probably still will, but that's not the point. You know, everybody just feels the same in this. It's just kind of weird. They're more from the Friday the 13th school of characters, I'd say, rather than Halloween characters, but one of the poorer Fridays, something like the New Blood. The kills in this are pretty good, although I say that as somebody who's not watched an awful lot of out-and-out slashers recently. If I'd have watched The Mutilator, having recently seen all those other classic slashers that I mentioned earlier in the video, I might have been less impressed with what you see here. But as it is, I can't lie, I did enjoy a lot of the kills in this. The killer is using some kind of large hook object. I don't know what you would call such a thing, but he does change up his MO. At one point, he uses like a chainsaw type thing, but it's not a chainsaw. I can't name any of the weapons in this movie, but there are some good sharp utensils and mechanical things used, I will say that, and some good use of practical effects on the whole. I would say the kills is the strongest thing about The Mutilator, which will either appeal to you or not, although there is one kill that is hugely problematic for me. So at one point, two of the characters decide to leave the party and go swimming in the pool that is part of the property. How many times have we seen this in horror films where you will have a bunch of kids at a party and two of them will decide to go off skinny dipping in freezing cold water in the middle of the night? I've just never seen this happen in real life. It's such a strange decision to take halfway through a night out or a party, but we all know, of course, that this is designed to get characters separated from each other. So these two kids, they end up in like an enclosed swimming pool that's covered at the top. It's a really nicely lit set, actually, and this should have been one of the best sequences in the movie. But the trouble is, we are asked to buy that the very human killer can sneak in, get into the water. It's not a big swimming pool. Kill the woman, and then take her body out of the swimming pool again, wander off, and he's going to do all this apparently without the boyfriend noticing, even though he's right next to his girlfriend in the pool, like just under the water, temporarily holding his breath, presumably with his eyes closed, but it's a little bit of a stretch that all this could happen around him and he would not notice. But still a very good set in a movie that doesn't really make the best use of its locations and sets and things. Like when the characters first drive up to this beach house, you'll think to yourself, oh, this looks like a great place for horror. And yet there's not actually a lot that happens inside the house in this movie. The killer seems quite allergic to the inside of the house somehow. A lot of the action and the kills take place in the garage or quite close to the garage, where it's all kind of close-knit and very grim. And why not use the beach more in this? Like, you're clearly filming next to a beach. Why not have chases on the beach, on the sand, get the characters into the water amongst the waves and stuff? Just mix it up a little bit. The actual killer in this is very bland. He's basically some boring-looking, middle-aged dude. You get a full facial of him very early on, so there's no mystery. He looks like a janitor who maybe got lost from work on the way home one day because he was drinking out of a vodka bottle, and then he just stumbled into this beach house, fell asleep in the basement for about 3 days until the characters of this movie show up. But he's not the most exciting of killers. I get that masks were probably going a little bit out of fashion in the slasher genre by 1984, but still, put a mask on this guy, I would have found it scarier than what you get ultimately. But I think this is a good time for me to segue into talking about the kookier side of this movie, because I'm going to be talking about the killer again with this. So this director, he has a few light elements in this film, but they just don't mix with the horror stuff. Like the music that plays near the beginning and at the end is like from a completely different genre altogether. It does not fit. I didn't like it. Halfway through this, there's a scene where one of the guys gets told by his girlfriend that he's not going to get to have sex with her until he goes down and locks the front door. So he starts doing this weird little celebration dance because he now knows he's definitely getting sex. It's like, oh yeah, blah, 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 blah. But in the post-edit, they've speeded it up even more. So it's just like a Benny Hill sketch. It's like really weird. And then he's walking out, he's going out the door and I'm like, oh, get this out of my horror movie. This is not what I wanted tonight. This is awful. Now, the end credits, you get a bit of this silliness as well. So it's one of those credit sequences where you see like outtakes of or clips of each actor as their name is put underneath. You used to see this a lot in films and TV shows from like way back in the day, but maybe it's not done as often these days. Scream did it in the 90s quite successfully, but on this occasion, I think they've not completely used clips from the actual movie. They've also used outtakes. And the one that they've got for the killer is just silly. So you see him grab this boy and he's suddenly smiling and laughing. He's like, and I'm thinking, well, that's definitely not in the movie because the killer didn't smile once in the movie. So you've clearly used some kind of outtake or failed take from the movie. And it's like, you're breaking the contract here between viewer and director. I don't want to see the killer laughing like 5 seconds after the film is finished. It's like if you watched Halloween and then suddenly on the credits, like Michael Myers rips his mask off and it's like, oh, look, it was Tony Moran all along. He's an actor from Pasadena and da-da, he's not really a killer. If that happened, I'd be like, piss off, Carpenter. You're finished, mate. I'm not watching any more of your movies. But yeah, that was an ugly side to this movie, the light-hearted tone. I'm not saying you can't have it in a horror movie, but it's got to be done better than this. This was just weird. I think it would have been better if they'd have just done a generic slasher film, in all honesty. So when it comes to this one, I liked it for the kills, and some of the sets are kind of good. The characters are all right, but I don't think this is destined to become one of my favourite slasher films from that sort of era. You know, when I think of my favourites, obviously Halloween and Friday the 13th, but Hell Night, House on Sorority Row, The Burning, The Prowler, those are what I consider to be the bee's knees of late 70s, early 80s slasher films. Those are the ones I go back to. The Mutilator, I'm not sure, to be honest, that I ever will. Normally at this point of the video, I would show you my copy of the film I've just reviewed, but I don't own The Mutilator, and I would say that I'm unlikely to in the future. But we can go to the Bag of Terror and see what sort of score I'm going to give this. So, we've got 1, 2.5. 2.5 Michael Myers carving knives out of 5. So pretty average film. I'd still say that it's worth a watch if you like slasher films, but it's definitely not one that I'm going to go back to, I don't think. I am keen on covering the sequel when it's finally released, though, because I'm so fascinated to see what this guy, Buddy Cooper, is going to do with the same concept like 40 years after he did the original. What has he learned from having had decades to reflect on the first Mutilator film? That could be quite interesting, I think. But for now, I'll love you and leave you. I'll catch you again next time. Bye-bye.